Welcome back, Big KIPPsters. Welcome to part 3. In this video, we are going to talk about how to appropriately assess vocabulary. We have 2 aims for today. The first is that you will be able to describe high-quality vocabulary assessment practices and that you will be able to create a high-quality vocabulary assessment. Before we begin, I want you to go ahead and check in with where you fall on the spectrum for these statements. Assessment practices motivate students. Assessment is a means to offering feedback to students. Assessments reveal a student's next steps for learning. Assessment practices reveal a teacher's next step for instructions. And assessment practices must include both formative and summative tools. Take a moment to look at those statements and think about where you fall on the spectrum from strongly agree to strongly disagree. No matter where you fall on the spectrum, I think it's safe to say that we all know that assessment practices are important in order for us to show what our students do or do not know. I want to go ahead and I want to zoom in on the last statement. The last statement says assessment practices must include both formative and summative tools. And that begs the question, what's the difference between a formative and a summative assessment? A formative assessment can be both formal and informal processes that teachers and students use to gather evidence for the purpose of improving learning. The last part there is really important. Anytime you are giving a formative assessment, you're not really assigning a grade for it. You want to know where the student is so you can think of the next steps they need in order to bring up their level of achievement. On the other hand, a summative assessment is one that provides evidence of student achievement for the purpose of making judgment about their competence or about how effective a program is. So in essence, you're giving them a numerical grade. Whether an assessment is formative or summative really depends on the information that is gleaned from that assessment. So a formative and a summative assessment could look exactly the same. It just depends on what you're doing with the data you get from it. If you're taking the data in order to inform your instruction, you're giving a formative assessment. If you're taking that data in order to assign a grade, you're giving a summative assessment. For us in vocabulary, I'd rather refer to them as informal and formal assessments. Your informal assessments, for the most part, are going to be formative, and they are for the purpose of improving learning. What do you need to do to help your students learn these words better? Formal, on the other hand, can either be a formative or a summative assessment. It's just what you do with the data that determines the type. Here are some examples of informal assessment. Remember, the goal of these is to improve our instruction. There are lots of opportunities within the 6-step process for informal assessment. For example, anytime you look at a student's vocabulary notes, you are essentially giving an informal assessment because I'm sure you're looking to identify areas of confusion or uncertainty about what they've written down and also to see which students are on track with finding the meaning of that word. Anytime you're moving around the room and listening to students' conversation during activities, discussions, games, you're essentially giving an informal assessment. You're listening in to see what students are saying, what's on target, what's not on target, and what misconceptions you need to go and clear up. Any worksheets or assignments that you give to a student that show their understanding of the term can be an informal assessment if you are using it to think about what do you need to do next in order to improve their understanding of that word. Also, any sort of student self-reflection, looking at their rankings for how comfortable they feel about a word, talking about if they're able to use it in context and sentences, is also a good informal assessment for you because it lets you know where students are and lets you think about what you need to do next. Here's an example of an informal assessment I gave my students this week on Monday as part of their life work. On Monday, we talked about globalization and migration, and we went through the first 3 steps of the vocabulary process with those words. Their life work that night was to tell me how the picture shows the meaning of the word. I used that life work to go back and think about what gaps did I need to fill in, or what discussions did I need to have one-on-one with certain students to help push ahead their understanding of these 2 words. Now let's go ahead and look at some examples of formal assessment. Remember, these are designed to show knowledge gain and student achievement. In the first example we have here, it's from 3rd grade, but it is a check on verb understanding. The students have to fill in the blank of the sentence with the correct academic verb. I like this assessment because students really have to understand the meaning of the verb in order to fill it in the sentence, because the sentence are sentences within context. When writing, blank information so that it is easy to read and understand. Students really have to understand what verb could go in there in order to show that they have met meaning of that word. The next formal assessment is a little bit different, but a great way to get at assessing vocabulary. Vocabulary assessments do not always have to be writing. In this assessment, the teacher is checking on story elements and is asking the students to draw a picture to represent the meaning of the word. Something that we ask students to do in the 6-step process anyway. The teacher can go back and check and assign points for each picture that matches the meaning of the vocabulary word. A creative way to get at checking vocabulary, and also a way that many students might appreciate more than just filling in the blank. Remember my vocabulary cycle from Friday? Well, let's take a look at where I've put in some of my assessments. Remember on Monday I gave them that informal writing assessment as life work to see where they were with their understanding of the meaning of vocabulary words globalization and migration. Throughout the week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I basically did informal checks anytime we were discussing the meaning of the word. I walked around, I listened to students, I checked in with a few who were really off base. We went back and we added new information into our vocabulary cards. Then on Thursday, I gave them another life work that was more of a formal assessment. It looked a little bit like this. I wanted students to fill in their own definition and their own picture for the words globalization, migration, push factor, and then pull factor, the 4 words that we looked at during the week. I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at their definition and their picture and assign them credit based on their understanding of the word and their ability to match the picture to the word. When you're thinking about planning effective formal assessments for your vocabulary cycle, here are some things to take into account. An effective formal assessment will give students opportunities to show their learning. It will take into account the multiple meanings of words, so the question won't limit it to just one meaning of the word. It will test vocabulary in context, so in a sentence, in the context of whatever topic it is in science or social studies. And it will take into account different learning styles. So it will give kids an opportunity to write, to draw, and to show that they know the word. Effective formal assessments do not always have to be traditional multiple choice, because those can be rather limiting. Remember, we don't give students a word-for-word definition of any of our words. Rather, we help them make meaning of it. And sometimes that traditional multiple choice will limit a student when they have made meaning of a word on their own. All right, here are your next steps. First, complete your Google Form exit ticket. Then, go back to your vocabulary cycle that you planned on Friday and plan for your assessments, both formal and informal. Think about when do you need to take informal data on students in order to help increase their understanding of your vocabulary words. Then think about when do you need to include a formal assessment. What do you want those to look like? What learning styles will they tackle? What will students be asked to do? Ask for help if you need it. Be ready to share your plan with your manager next week in your O3. Next week, we're going to do some planning ahead. We're going to talk about the different types of words and what words really need to be taught. We're also going to spend some time in our content teams to think about, for our grade level and in our content, what are the most important words that students need to walk out of our classrooms at the end of the year knowing. See you then.